The silver chalice shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent cathedral of Ethelgard. In that moment the air didn't just turn cold, it vanished. Thousands of elite guests, draped in silks and heavy furs, held their collective breath as the scent of ozone and ancient earth flooded the sanctuary. This wasn't the scripted union of the northern and southern high houses. This was something primal. Something forbidden. The great alphas stood frozen as Dominic Toretto, the Lycan King whose name was whispered to frighten disobedient children into silence, ignored the bride waiting at the altar. Instead, his golden slit-pupil gaze locked onto a girl standing in the shadows of the choir loft. A girl who was never supposed to be noticed. Clara Swantowski. "You," Dominic growled, the vibration of his voice rattling the stained glass. The soul bond snapped into place with the force of a physical blow, a tether of white-hot lightning connecting his predatory heart to her pounding one. He didn't just choose her. He claimed her in front of the gods and the monsters. But as the court erupted into a frenzy of unsheathed steel and outraged roars, Clara did the one thing no one survives. She vanished into the mist of the forbidden forest. She didn't just leave a king at the altar, she stole the future of a dynasty. And now, 7 years later, the king has found a scent he thought was lost to the grave. The scent of his own blood doubled, hidden in a cabin at the edge of the world. Hello to all of you beautiful souls joining us today from every corner of the globe. Whether you're watching from the rainy streets of London, the sun-drenched plains of Texas, or the vibrant heart of Lagos, I am so incredibly grateful to have you here in our storytelling circle. How are you all doing today? I hope your heart is ready for a journey of sacrifice and fierce love. Before we dive into the mystery of Clara's flight and the king's relentless hunt, have you joined our family yet? If you haven't, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications. We are building a community of dreamers here, and your support is the heartbeat of these stories. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of what's coming next. Where are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments. I love reading about your home cities. Clara Swantowski's fingers trembled as she adjusted the lace of her servant's bodice, her breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. She was a ghost in the house of Ethelgard, a distant cousin kept in the kitchens to scrub floors and stay out of the light. Her aunt, the matriarch, had been clear: do not speak. Do not look up. Do not exist. But as she peered over the balcony, the sensory overload of the royal wedding made her head spin. The smell of expensive lilies fought against the metallic tang of the Lycan Guard's armor. The atmosphere was thick with political tension, a fragile peace treaty wrapped in a wedding veil. Below her, the Lycan King, Dominic Toretto, stood like a statue carved from obsidian. He was terrifying, scars tracing a history of 1,000 wars across his jawline, his shoulders wide enough to carry the weight of an empire. He was supposed to marry the Princess of the South to end the Great Skirmish. Clara felt a strange, pulsing heat in her chest. It was a rhythmic thrum, a drumbeat that matched the king's own heavy stride. No, she thought, clutching her chest. Not now. Not me. When Dominic's head snapped up, his eyes shifting from deep chocolate to a glowing, predatory gold, Clara felt the world tilt. The mate bond was a myth to her, a fairy tale told to noble girls. To a servant like her, it was a death sentence. When he pointed that gloved hand toward the loft and roared his claim, the sheer volume of his obsession sent a shockwave through the room. "Mine," he bellowed, his voice thick with a hunger that promised both protection and destruction. In the ensuing chaos, the princess screaming in humiliation, the guards rushing the aisles, the high lords shouting for order, Clara didn't feel chosen. She felt hunted. She knew the Ethelgard secrets. She knew that the king's enemies would never let a nobody carry the royal heirs. They would kill her before she could even take the throne. As Dominic fought his way through the crowd, tossing aside armored men like they were made of straw, his eyes never left hers. There was a desperate, raw vulnerability in his expression for a split second, a silent plea for her to stay. "Don't run, Clara," he whispered, though she shouldn't have been able to hear him over the din. But she had to. For him, for the kingdom, and for the secret she already carried in her soul. She turned and bolted into the secret passages of the cathedral, the darkness swallowing her whole just as the king's hand brushed the hem of her skirt. She was gone. Why did a woman who just found her soulmate choose to disappear into a life of poverty and fear? What was the secret Clara Swantowski discovered in the bowels of the palace that made the king's love more dangerous than his hate? The biting winds of the Blackridge Mountains didn't howl. They screamed, tearing at the cedar shingles of the isolated cabin Clara now called home. Inside, the air smelled of dried lavender, pine resin, and the milky, sweet scent of sleep. Clara Swantowski leaned against the heavy oak door, her fingers tracing the deep gouges in the wood, scars from a mountain lion she'd driven off 3 winters ago. She wasn't the trembling servant girl from the Ethelgard kitchens anymore. Her hands were calloused, her gaze as sharp as the flint she used to spark their hearth, and her heart was a fortress built of iron and secrets. In the corner, nestled in a bed of hand-loomed wool, lay the reasons for her exile. Milo and Alara. They were barely 6 years old, but even in sleep their presence was commanding. Milo's hair was the exact shade of midnight as the king's, while Alara possessed the same stubborn set to her jaw that Clara saw every morning in the cracked vanity mirror. But it was the faint, pulsating silver glow beneath their skin, the lupin luminescence, that marked them as true-blooded royalty. To the world, they were bastards of a mountain stray. To Clara, they were the last embers of a fire she had tried to extinguish the night she fled. Clara's deepest fear wasn't that Dominic would find her and kill her for her insolence. It was that he would find her and love them. Because in the Lycan court, love was a bullseye. She remembered the scrolls she'd stumbled upon while cleaning the high priest's study, the purge of the half-bloods. The southern houses would never allow a servant's litter to inherit the throne. If Dominic knew they existed, he would bring them into a den of vipers, believing his strength could protect them. But Clara knew better. No wall was high enough to stop a poison needle or a tragic accident in the training pits. "Mama." Milo stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They weren't blue like hers. They were a startling molten gold that seemed to illuminate the dim room. "I smelled the forest today. It smelled like metal and thunder." Clara's heart did a slow, painful roll in her chest. The thunder scent. It was the signature of the Toretto line, the olfactory warning that the king was near. She knelt by his side, smoothing his hair. "It's just the storm coming over the peaks, little wolf. Go back to sleep." But she knew. The wards she'd paid a wandering hedge witch to place around the valley were flickering. Supporting her in this frozen purgatory was Viggo Mortensen Hallowell, an old, scarred Lycan warrior who had been exiled decades ago for refusing to slaughter a village of innocents. Viggo lived in the cave system beneath the ridge, acting as their silent guardian. He was the only one who knew who the children really were. He'd taught Clara how to mask her scent with crushed hemlock and how to kill a man with a silver-tipped arrow before he could shift. "He's in the valley, Clara." Viggo's voice grated from the shadows of the porch. He didn't knock, he simply appeared, his one good eye fixed on the horizon. "The king hasn't eaten or slept in 3 days. He's tracking a ghost and he's burning through the forest like a wildfire." "He can't have them, Viggo," Clara whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in years. "If he takes them to the capital, the council will have their heads before the first moonrise." "He doesn't want the children, girl. He doesn't even know they exist," Viggo countered, his tone softening. "He wants you. He's been a hollow shell for 7 years. A king with a crown but no soul. He isn't hunting a criminal, he's searching for the piece of himself that was ripped out at the altar." Clara looked at her sleeping children. Her motivation had always been simple: survival. But beneath the fear was a treacherous, aching desire she buried every night. She still dreamt of the way Dominic's hand felt against her waist, hot, possessive, and safe. She dreamt of the look in his eyes when he claimed her, a look that said he would burn the world down just to see her smile. But she couldn't afford a soulmate. She was a mother. "Let him come," Clara said, her voice hardening as she reached for the silver dagger hidden beneath the floorboards. "But he will find a wolf mother, not a maid. Are you feeling the tension yet? I can almost smell the pine in the coming storm." If you're rooting for Clara and her brave little twins, let me know by dropping a Team Clara in the comments. And if you're enjoying the depth of this world, make sure you've shared this video with a friend who loves a good supernatural mystery. It really helps the channel grow, and we have so many more twists coming up. Now let's see what happens when the king finally steps out of the shadows. Meanwhile, 10 miles down the ridge, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dominic Toretto stood in the center of a scorched clearing, his cape tattered and his boots caked in frozen mud. His beta Brian O'Connor Ripley watched from a distance, wary of the king's volatile energy. For 7 years Dominic had been a specter. He had dismantled the southern houses that dared to mock his lost mate, turning the kingdom into a military powerhouse. He was richer, more powerful and more feared than any Lycan in history, and he was utterly miserable. "The scent is stronger here, sire," Brian remarked, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "But there's something else. Something familiar. It's like your scent but muted. Younger." Dominic didn't answer. He closed his eyes, his nostrils flaring. He didn't care about politics or the lingering threats from the council. He cared about the girl who had smelled like rain and jasmine. The girl who had looked at him with such terror and longing that it had shattered his predatory heart. He had checked every morgue, every village, every slave market in the known world. He didn't know why she ran. He didn't know she had been pregnant. He only knew that without her, the beast inside him was winning the war for his sanity. "I don't care if she's hidden by the gods themselves," Dominic growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that caused the nearby trees to shed their frost. "I am the king of the apex. I am the alpha of the moon. And today I am taking my mate home." He looked up at the peak where a single flickering light danced in the window of a small cabin. He didn't see a trap. He saw his salvation. Little did he know he was about to walk into a confrontation that would challenge everything he knew about power and the price of a crown. The silence of the mountain wasn't broken by a roar or a crash. It was shattered by the rhythmic, heavy thud of a heart that beat in perfect synchronization with Clara's own. It was a physical pull, a gravitational shift that made the very floorboards of the cabin groan. Clara stood by the hearth, her knuckles white as she gripped the hilt of her silver-etched dagger. "Milo Ilera into the cellar." "Now," she commanded, her voice a sharp, low whip crack. "But Mama, the Thunder Man is at the door," Ilera whispered, her golden eyes wide with a terrifying recognition she shouldn't possess. "The cellar. Do not make a sound until I come for you," Clara hissed, ushering them toward the trapdoor hidden beneath the rug. As the heavy wood clicked shut over her children, the front door of the cabin didn't just open, it disintegrated. The frame splintered under the sheer pressure of the Alpha's presence. Dominic Toretto stepped over the threshold, his massive frame filling the small room, blocking out the moonlight. He looked like a god of war returned from a century of slaughter. His black leather armor was scarred, his dark hair windblown, and his eyes, those molten predatory gold pits, were fixed on Clara with a ferocity that made her knees weak. 7 years, Dominic rasped, the words sounding like grinding stones. 7 years of searching every gutter and palace in the hemisphere. And I find you in a shack, smelling of hemlock and poverty. "I am exactly where I chose to be, Dominic," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotion battering her ribs. She didn't call him Your Majesty. She called him by the name she had whispered in her dreams for 2,000 nights. Dominic took a step forward, the heat radiating from his body enough to wilt the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. He reached out, his large, calloused hand trembling as it hovered near her cheek. "Why, I gave you my soul in that cathedral. I gave you a crown. I gave you the protection of the greatest army the world has ever seen. Why did you run from me like I was the monster they say I am?" "Because you are a king," Clara shouted, the dam finally breaking. She didn't flinch as he loomed over her. "And a king's mate is a target. Your council would have bled me dry to see if I was worthy. Your enemies would have used me to break you. I didn't run from you, Dominic. I ran from the world that comes with you." The air in the room thickened, the mate bond flared, a shimmering golden cord visible for a split second between their chests. The attraction was a physical weight pulling them together. Dominic's hand finally made contact, his thumb brushing her jawline. The touch was electric, a searing heat that promised 1,000 years of devotion. For a moment the king's mask slipped, revealing a man who was drowning in relief. "I would have burned the council to ash for you," he whispered, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "I would have turned the world to cinders to keep you safe. And what of our children?" Clara's voice was a ghost of a sound, but it hit Dominic like a physical blow. He froze. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. "What did you say?" "Mama." The small, muffled voice came from beneath the floorboards. The trapdoor creaked open just an inch, enough for a pair of glowing gold eyes to peek through. The world stopped spinning. Dominic's gaze dropped to the floor. With a slow, deliberate movement he knelt. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man seeing a miracle. He hooked a finger under the trapdoor and lifted it. Milo and Alara climbed out, blinking in the dim light. They didn't shrink back in fear. They looked at the giant in their living room with a strange, innate curiosity. Milo stepped forward, his small hand reaching out to touch the silver wolf head crest on Dominic's chest. "You're the one from the stories," Milo said quietly. "The one who protects the moon." Dominic made a sound, a choked, broken sob that he quickly turned into a rough, cleared throat. He looked at the twins, then up at Clara, his face a mask of shock, fury, and a love so intense it was frightening. "Twins. My heirs. Hidden in the mud for 7 years. They are safe here, Dominic," Clara said, stepping between him and the children. "Safe." Dominic stood up, his height once again a threat. "The Southern Lords have mobilized. They found my trail, Claire. They aren't coming for a mate anymore. They are coming to eliminate the threat to their bloodline. If I found you, they are only hours behind." As if on cue, a horn blasted in the distance. The low, mournful cry of a Southern war horn. "They're here," Clara whispered, her face pale. "No," Dominic growled, his claws beginning to extend from his fingertips, his shift beginning in his jaw and shoulders. "They are dead men. They just don't know it yet." The first major plot twist had landed. The king hadn't just found his mate. He had found a legacy he wasn't prepared to protect, and the very enemies Clara fled from were now at their doorstep. Can you believe it? The king finally knows. My heart is racing just writing this. How do you think Dominic will react when he sees the size of the army coming for his family? Tell me in the comments. Do you think he should stay and fight at the cabin or take them back to the capital? Also, if you're loving the story so far, please make sure you've hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this story to more people who need a little magic in their day. The air in the cabin shifted from the heat of a reunion to the cold, metallic sting of imminent war. Dominic didn't roar. He became a shadow, his movements fluid and terrifyingly efficient. He moved to the window, his golden eyes piercing the thick mountain mist. Down the slope, torches flickered like malevolent fireflies, hundreds of them cutting through the pines. "Brian." Dominic's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of a mountain collapsing. Brian O'Connor Ripley appeared at the shattered doorway in a heartbeat, his twin blades already drawn. He skidded to a halt, his gaze dropping to Milo and Alara, who were huddled against Clara's legs. Brian's jaw dropped, his usual stoic mask shattering. "Sire, are those pie blood?" Dominic growled, not looking back. "My life. Signal the vanguard. If a single southern blade crosses the perimeter, I want the valley painted in their heraldry." "Dominic, wait." Clara stepped forward, her hand catching his leather-clad forearm. The touch sparked that same electric tether, but she forced herself to ignore it. "They aren't just here for me anymore. They've seen your standard. They know you found something valuable. If you fight them here, this cabin becomes a tomb for our children." Dominic turned, his face a mask of brutal determination, but his eyes softened as they landed on her. "I have spent 7 years being half a man, Clara. I'm not losing you again. Not to them. Not to anyone." "Then we move," she said, her voice hard. "Vigo knows the tunnels. They lead to the sunken gorge. Your horses can't follow, but neither can their heavy infantry." The tension outside escalated as a volley of flaming arrows whistled through the night sky, thudding into the thatched roof of the cabin. Smoke began to curl around the rafters. Milo whimpered, clutching his sister's hand, but Alara stood tall, her small chest heaving as she stared at the fire with a strange, fearless intensity. "To the cellar," Clara shouted. As they descended into the damp, earth-smelling tunnels, the romantic tension between Dominic and Clara became a living thing in the cramped space. Every time their shoulders brushed or Dominic reached out to steady her on the slick stones, the air felt thick enough to choke on. He stayed behind her, a wall of muscle and protective fury, while Brian and Vigo scouted ahead. "You taught them well," Dominic murmured, his voice echoing off the cavern walls. He was watching Milo, who was moving with the silent toe-to-heel gait of a hunter. "He moves like a prince of the north." "I taught him to survive," Clara countered, her heart aching. "I didn't want them to be princes, Dominic. I wanted them to be free." "There is no freedom for our kind without power, Clara," he said, his hand lingering on the small of her back as they navigated a narrow crevice. But I see now why you left. The council, they told me you were a spy. They told me you had been paid by the southern houses to humiliate me. I almost believed them until I found your ribbon in the mud of the forest. Clara stopped, turning to face him in the dim light of a bioluminescent fungus. You kept it. Dominic reached into a hidden pouch near his heart and pulled out a frayed, dirt-stained scrap of blue silk. It was the only thing I had left of my soul. The moment of vulnerability was shattered by a distant explosion. The southern mages had found the cabin and leveled it. The vibration shook the tunnel, sending dust and pebbles raining down on them. They're using earth-shatter spells, Vigo called out from the front. They're trying to bury us alive. As they sprinted toward the exit, a new obstacle appeared. A massive iron-wrought gate blocked the path, a relic of the old wars. It required 2 alphas to lift, or a specific key lost to time. Brian with me, Dominic shouted. As the 2 powerful men strained against the frozen iron, their muscles bulging and veins popping, Clara stood guard with her silver dagger. Suddenly the scent of the tunnel changed. It wasn't just damp earth anymore. It was the cloyingly sweet smell of nightshade and rot. From the shadows behind them a figure emerged. It wasn't a soldier. It was Bellatrix Lestrange Vane, the high priestess of the southern court. The woman Dominic was supposed to have married 7 years ago. She looked beautiful and haggard, her eyes glowing with a sickly violet light. The runaway bride, Bellatrix hissed, her gaze landing on the twins. And she brought back up. How touching. Did you really think you could hide the king's bastards forever, Clara? Clara stepped in front of the children, her blade raised. They aren't bastards. They are the heirs to the north. They are an imbalance, Bellatrix spat, raising her hands as purple lightning began to crackle between her fingers. And I am the correction. Dominic roared, his shift nearly complete, his face lengthening into a lupin snarl as he redoubled his efforts against the gate. The iron began to groan and give way, but Bellatrix was faster. She unleashed a bolt of energy aimed directly at Milo. In a blur of motion, Clara didn't use her knife. She threw herself in front of her son. But the strike never hit. A shimmering gold shield erupted from Alara. The 6-year-old stood with her palms out, her eyes glowing like twin suns. The violet lightning splashed harmlessly against her barrier. The girl wasn't just a Lycan, she was something more. A hybrid of her father's strength and a latent magical talent from Clara's forgotten lineage. The blood of the first wolves, Vigo whispered in awe. The gate screeched open. Dominic lunged, catching Clara and the children in his massive arms and swinging them through the opening just as the tunnel ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing Bellatrix on the other side. They stood on a narrow ledge overlooking the sunken gorge, the moon hanging massive and silver above them. They were safe for now, but the revelation of Alara's power had changed everything. Did you see that coming? Alara has magic. This changes the whole game. The southern houses won't just want them dead now. They'll want to harvest that power. I'm literally shaking. What do you think Clara's reaction will be to her daughter's hidden talent? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your theories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is where the real mystery begins. The sunken gorge was a cathedral of mist and jagged stone, where the moonlight struggled to reach the valley floor. They huddled in a shallow cave, the air thick with the scent of ozone from Alara's outburst and the musky, wild heat of Dominic's near shift. The king sat against the cavern wall, his chest heaving as his claws slowly retracted into human nails. His gaze was fixed on his daughter, who was fast asleep in Clara's lap, her small hands still twitching with the remnants of golden sparks. She has the light of the first mother, Dominic whispered, his voice cracking with a reverence Clara had never heard. That power hasn't been seen in the Toretto line for 3 centuries. It's the mark of the true sovereign. Clara tightened her grip on Alara, her knuckles white. It's a death warrant, Dominic. That's what it is. If the council knows she can manifest a shield like that, they won't just kill her. They'll keep her in a cage and use her as a battery for their wars. I would tear the throat out of any man who tried, Dominic growled, his eyes flashing gold. You couldn't even stop them from chasing us to this cave. Clara snapped, her voice echoing off the damp walls. You think your crown makes you invincible? It makes you a target and it makes our children pieces on a chessboard. Why do you think I really left, Dominic? Do you think it was just fear of the southern houses? Dominic stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow that swallowed the small fire Vigo had managed to light. He stepped toward her, his intensity radiating like a physical heat. Tell me. No more riddles, Clara. No more shadows. Why did you vanish when I called you mine? Clara stood to meet him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached into the hidden lining of her cloak and pulled out a small yellowed parchment, the same one she had stolen from the High Priest's archives 7 years ago. She thrust it into his hand. Read the secondary clause of the Union Pact, Dominic. The one your father signed before he died. Dominic unfurled the scroll, his eyes scanning the ancient script. As he reached the bottom, his face went from regal fury to a haunting hollow pale. His hand began to shake. In the event of a true mate being found outside the great houses, the bloodline must be purified through the ritual of the sun binding. The mate shall be consecrated, and any offspring produced shall be surrendered to the High Council to be raised as shield brothers, divested of their names, their parents, and their inheritance. Dominic's breath hitched. They would have taken them. From the moment they were born. They would have taken them and they would have killed me during the consecration, Clara whispered, tears finally blurring her vision. The ritual is a public execution disguised as a blessing. I didn't run because I didn't love you, Dominic. I ran because loving you meant watching our children become nameless soldiers and watching myself die in your name. I chose their life over our love. The revelation shattered the last of Dominic's royal composure. He dropped the scroll, the parchment fluttering into the embers of the fire. He reached out not with the possessive grip of a king, but with the desperate hands of a man who realized he had been a puppet for a system that hated him. He pulled Clara into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. I didn't know, he choked out, his voice muffled by her hair. I thought they were protecting the tradition. I thought they were my allies. They are the monsters in the dark, Dominic, Clara said, her arms finally winding around his waist, the mate bond surging between them with a tragic, overwhelming force. In this moment of shared vulnerability, the walls between them vanished. The King of the North was crying, his tears hot against her skin, while the woman who had lived as a ghost finally felt seen. But as they clung to each other, the stakes reached a breaking point. From the entrance of the cave, Brian's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. Sire. The mist is clearing. But it's not the sun. It's silver fire. Dominic spun around, his protective instincts flaring. High above the gorge, a fleet of southern skyship galleons had emerged from the clouds. They weren't just searching, they were systematic. They were dropping jars of moonbane, a gas that forced Lycans into a painful, uncontrollable shift, stripping them of their human reason and turning them into mindless beasts. They're going to turn us, Vigo shouted, grabbing his axe. If we shift under the influence of the bane, we'll kill everything in this cave, including the children. Dominic looked at Clara, his face a mask of agonizing determination. The council didn't just send the South. They sent the purifiers. They aren't here to capture us anymore, Clara. They're here to erase the evidence of the pact. The midpoint had shifted everything. The king's own council was the true antagonist, his daughter was a living legend, and the woman he loved had been a hero for 7 years while he had been a fool. Now, trapped in a gorge with a gas that would turn him into his own children's murderer, the king had to make a choice that would change the world. I am literally breathless. Can you believe the betrayal? The very people Dominic trusted were the ones who forced Clara into hiding. My heart is breaking for them. What would you do if you were Dominic? Would you turn on your own counsel or try to negotiate? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And hey, if you're as invested as I am, please hit that subscribe button. We're heading into the darkest hour next and things are about to get intense. The air in the cave didn't just grow cold, it turned toxic. A sickly, iridescent green mist began to crawl over the lip of the gorge, heavy and clinging. It was the moonbane. As the first wisps touched Dominic's skin, his muscles began to ripple uncontrollably. His bones snapped and elongated, the forced transformation tearing a guttural scream of pure agony from his throat. This wasn't the sacred shift of a Lycan King. This was a biological hijacking. Clara, get them back. Dominic gasped, his eyes bleeding from gold to a sightless, maddened crimson. He fell to his knees, his fingers clawing deep furrows into the stone floor. I can't. I can't hold him back. Vigo, help him. Clara shouted, but the old warrior was already collapsing, his own shift taking hold with violent tremors. Brian O'Connor Ripley, younger and more resilient, managed to stumble toward the back of the cave, shoving the heavy supply crates in front of the children. Clara, if the king turns under the bane, he won't recognize you. He'll see prey. Only prey. Milo and Alara were wide awake now, huddled in the darkest corner. Milo's small face was set in a mask of terror, while Alara's hands were sparking again, but the golden light was dim, dampened by the oppressive weight of the gas. Papa. Alara whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic let out a bone-chilling howl, a sound devoid of soul, filled only with the hunger of a feral beast. He lunged, his massive fur-covered shoulder slamming into the stone wall inches from where Clara stood. He was no longer the man who had cried in her arms moments ago. He was a 400-pound killing machine, his jaws snapping at the air, strings of saliva lashing his predatory face. Dominic, look at me. Clara screamed, holding her ground even as the beast's hot, rancid breath fanned her face. It's Clara. Look at your children. The wolf that was once a king snarled, a low, vibrating rumble that shook the very foundation of the cave. He crouched, muscles coiled like steel springs, preparing to spring at the intruder, blocking his path to the small, scent-filled creatures in the corner. But the horror from within the cave was matched by the nightmare from above. The skyships had landed. The sound of heavy, rhythmic boots marched toward the cave entrance. High-ranking purifiers, clad in silver-plated armor designed to reflect Lycan claws, stepped into the light of the dying fire. At their head was Commander Maximus Decimus Von, the man Clara had seen whispering in the high priest's ear the night she fled. What a tragic scene, Maximus drawled, his voice amplified by a brass magi calm. The great Lycan King, reduced to a rabid dog, feasting on his own commoner mate and her bastard whelps. The council will weep as they tell the story of how we had to put you all down for the safety of the realm. You did this, Clara hissed, her hand finding the silver dagger, though she knew it was useless against an armored squad. We perfected the tradition, girl, Maximus said, raising a heavy crossbow loaded with a jagged black-tipped bolt. The bloodline stays pure or it ends here. He didn't aim at Clara. He aimed at Milo. No. Clara lunged, but she was too far. The bolt hissed through the air. In that split second the world slowed to a crawl. The feral wolf that was Dominic turned his head. Deep within that crimson gaze, a spark of the father flickered. With a roar that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting, the beast threw his massive body into the path of the bolt. The black arrow sank deep into Dominic's chest, straight into his heart. The king collapsed, the impact sliding his massive form across the cave floor. He didn't shift back. He lay there in his wolf form, his breathing shallow and wet, the moonbane still swirling around him. Dominic. Clara fell to her knees beside him, her hands disappearing into his thick, dark fur. Maximus laughed, a dry, hollow sound. The king is dead. Soldiers, finish the rest. Burn the cave. Leave nothing but ash. The soldiers raised their flamethrowers. The heat began to sear the oxygen from the room. Clara looked at her children, then at the dying beast who had sacrificed his last shred of humanity to save a son he barely knew. The situation was beyond hopeless. They were trapped between a rabid, dying king, a squad of executioners, and a fire that would consume their souls. Mama, Alara sobbed, her golden light flickering out entirely. I'm scared. Clara pulled them close, closing her eyes as the first wave of fire roared toward them. This was the end. 7 years of hiding, of dreaming, of fighting, all for it to end in a nameless grave in the sunken gorge. I can't even see the screen through my tears right now. Is this really how it ends? Dominic is down, the purifiers are closing in, and the children are terrified. My heart is absolutely shattered. Do you think there's any way out of this? Is there a secret we've missed? Please, if you're still with me, drop a "Stay Strong Clara" in the comments. We need all the hope we can get for the next part. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. I don't know if I can get through the turning point without you. The roar of the flamethrowers was a wall of white-hot death, but as the fire reached the center of the cave, it didn't consume. It parted. Clara looked up, her eyes stinging from the smoke, and saw a sight that defied every law of the Lycan world. Clara wasn't crying anymore. The 6-year-old stood over her fallen father, her small hands pressed firmly against the black-tipped bolt buried in his chest. A blinding, crystalline gold light erupted from her palms, flowing into Dominic's fur like liquid sun. It wasn't just a shield this time, it was a purification. The moonbane mist, touched by the girl's light, turned from toxic green to a harmless, shimmering white. "Papa, wake up," Elara whispered, her voice echoing with a power that sounded like a choir of ancient wolves. "The moon is calling you home." The effect was instantaneous. Dominic's body jerked. The black-tipped bolt, forged with dark southern alchemy, was slowly pushed out of his chest by the sheer force of the regenerative light. His fur retreated, his bones snapped back into place with a sickening series of cracks, and his skin knitted together before Clara's very eyes. But he didn't just wake up. He ascended. Dominic opened his eyes, and they weren't gold anymore. They were a brilliant, burning white, the mark of the celestial Alpha, a legend that had been dead for 1,000 years. He stood up, his naked chest scarred but glowing with the same internal light as his daughter. The moonbane had tried to break his mind, but Elara's love had forged a bridge back to his soul, unlocking a dormant power the council had spent centuries trying to suppress. "Maximus," Dominic said, his voice no longer a growl, but a resonant boom that made the soldier's silver armor vibrate. "You spoke of a tragedy. You were right. The tragedy is that you believed a crown was the source of my power." Maximus stepped back, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "Impossible. The sun binding, it's a myth. You should be a corpse." "I am a father," Dominic countered, stepping into the path of the flamethrowers. The fire washed over him, but he didn't burn. He walked through the flames as if they were a summer breeze, his hand reaching out to snatch the lead soldier's weapon and crush it like a tin can. Vigo and Brian, also cleared of the bane by Elara's radiating light, surged forward. The cave, once a trap, became a bottleneck for the purifiers. They weren't fighting a cornered animal anymore. They were fighting a god and his court. "Clara," Dominic called out, not looking back as he tossed a soldier into the gorge. "Take the children to the ledge. The vanguard is arriving." From the mists below, the true northern army, the ones loyal to the king, not the council, erupted into view. Hundreds of Lycans in their natural shifts scaled the cliffs like shadows, their howls joining in a symphony of liberation. The purifiers realized too late that they were outnumbered and outmatched by a king who had finally found something worth more than his throne. In the midst of the battle, Dominic turned to Clara. Amidst the clashing steel and the roar of the wind, he grabbed her face in his hands. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He pressed his forehead to hers, a silent vow passing between them. "I know the truth now," he whispered. "I know what they did to us. And I promise you, Clara Swantowski, by the end of this night, there will be no more hiding. There will be no more consecrations. We are going to rewrite the laws of the North with the blood of the men who tried to tear us apart. We do it together," Clara said, her hand covering his. "No more running." The turning point had arrived. The king was reborn, his daughter was the key to a new era, and the woman who fled out of fear was now the heart of a revolution. Hope didn't just flicker in the sunken gorge, it roared. Chills. Literal chills. "Did you see the way Dominic looked at her? That is a man who would move mountains. And Elara, our little queen, just saved the entire dynasty. I'm so proud of her." What do you think the council's reaction will be when they see the celestial Alpha returning to the capital? Leave a comment with King Dominic if you're ready for the final showdown. Also, we are so close to the end, make sure you've shared this with everyone who loves a satisfying revenge story. The capital of Ethelgard didn't expect a war. It expected a funeral. The High Council sat in the obsidian-vaulted star chamber, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of 1,000 ritual candles. At the head of the long marble table sat High Priest Elrond Denholm, the man who had authored the Purge of the Half-Bloods, and whispered the lies that had driven Clara into the frozen wilderness. Beside him sat Grand Duchess Catherine Beckett, her fingers draped in stolen northern sapphires. "The purifiers should have returned by now," Catherine murmured, her voice like ice scraping against silk. "If Maximus has failed to erase the girl and the bastards, the southern houses will break the treaty." "Maximus does not fail," Elrond countered, his eyes narrow and pitiless. "By dawn, the king will be a tragic hero who died in the line of duty, and we shall appoint a regent more pliable. The bloodline must be pure, Catherine. At any cost. But the heavy, iron-reinforced doors of the star chamber didn't open. They exploded inward. A wave of crystalline golden light swept through the room, snuffing out every candle in a single silent heartbeat. In the sudden darkness, a pair of brilliant white glowing eyes burned like twin stars. Dominic Toretto stepped through the dust and debris, his presence so massive it seemed to shrink the vaulted ceiling. He wasn't wearing his crown. He didn't need it. The light of the celestial alpha radiated from his skin, casting long, terrifying shadows across the council's pale faces. The purge is over, Elrond. Dominic's voice wasn't a shout. It was a vibration that rattled the very foundations of the city. Beside him, looking every bit the queen she was born to be, stood Clara Swantowski. She wasn't in servant's rags anymore. She wore a duster of wolf fur over reinforced leather, her silver dagger unsheathed, her eyes fixed on the high priest with a decade's worth of bottled fury. And between them, holding their parents' hands, were Milo and Alara. Guards! Elrond shrieked, his composure shattering. Kill them. They are abominations. The Moonbane has corrupted the king. A dozen elite sentinel Lycans, the council's personal guard, lunged from the shadows. They were the fiercest warriors in the realm, trained to kill their own kind without hesitation. But they didn't even reach the midpoint of the room. Alara stepped forward, her small hand reaching out toward the charging soldiers. She didn't unleash a blast of destruction. She unleashed a wave of truth. The golden light hit the sentinels, and for the first time in their lives, the magical compulsions and loyalty spells the council had placed on them evaporated. The warriors skidded to a halt, their eyes clearing of the dull red haze of magical slavery. They looked at Dominic, their true king, glowing with the light of the First Mother, and they dropped to their knees, their swords clattering against the marble. We do not serve the council, the lead sentinel rasped, bowing his head. We serve the moon. We serve the Alpha. Dominic walked toward the council table, the marble cracking beneath his boots. He reached out and grabbed the ancient Union Pact, the very scroll Clara had stolen years ago, and tore it in half. You used my father's grief to write these laws, Dominic said, his gaze locking onto Elrond. You turned our mates into targets and our children into weapons. You told me the bloodline must be pure, but the only thing you cared about was your own grip on the throat of this kingdom. You cannot change the laws. Catherine Beckett screamed, her hands trembling as she clutched her jewels. The southern houses will invade. Without the sun binding, we have no peace. Then let them come, Clara said, her voice ringing clear and resonant through the chamber. The South followed a king because they feared his strength. Now they will face a family that protects its own. You traded our souls for a peace that was just a slow death. That trade is finished. Elrond, desperate and cornered, pulled a hidden vial of silver vitriol from his robes, a liquid that could melt a Lycan's heart in seconds. He lunged at Clara, his face a mask of old-world bigotry. But Dominic was faster. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He caught Elrond's wrist in midair, the strength of the celestial alpha shattering the bones like dry twigs. The vial fell to the floor, shattering harmlessly. Dominic leaned in close to the high priest, his white eyes burning with a righteous heat. I am the king of the Apex, Dominic whispered. And you are nothing but a ghost of a dead era. With a flick of his wrist, Dominic sent the high priest reeling back into his seat. Vigo, Brian, take them to the Blackridge dungeons. They will stand trial not by the council's laws, but by the code of the pack. Every secret they've buried will be brought into the light. As the guards dragged the screaming council members away, a profound silence settled over the Star Chamber. The war was over. The most satisfying twist wasn't the battle, but the realization that the nobody maid had been the strongest person in the room all along. Dominic turned to Clara, the intense, blinding white light of his power softening into a warm, golden glow. He looked at her, and for the first time in 7 years he didn't see a ghost or a target. He saw his partner. I told you I would burn the world for you, he murmured, his hands finding her waist. You didn't have to burn it, Dominic, Clara replied, a soft smile finally touching her lips. You just had to let the sun rise. He leaned down, and this time there were no interruptions. The kiss was a collision of 7 years of longing, a seal on a new law, and a promise of a future that no longer had to be hidden in the mist. Triumph. My heart is literally soaring. The council is gone, the truth is out, and the family is finally safe. Did you see the way the sentinels bowed to Alara? He's going to be a legend. I am so happy we got to this moment together. What was your favorite part of the showdown? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing what moved you the most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're missing the most beautiful ending we've ever written. Let's head to part 9 for the final closure. The snow falling over Ethelgard was no longer a shroud of isolation. It was a blanket of peace. 1 month had passed since the night the Star Chamber fell, and the kingdom breathed a collective sigh of relief that tasted of wood smoke and freedom. The purge of the half-bloods had been struck from every record, replaced by the Clara Decree, a new law stating that a Lycan's worth was measured by their character, not the antiquity of their pedigree. Dominic stood on the royal balcony, the heavy velvet curtains fluttering behind him. He looked down at the courtyard where the once feared Lycan King was now watching something far more important than a military drill. Below, Milo was laughing as he raced a young pup from the village, his golden eyes bright with a joy that had no shadow. Beside him, Alara was sitting with Vigo, the old warrior patiently showing her how to focus her internal light into a small dancing butterfly of gold. They look like they belong here, a soft voice murmured. Dominic turned to see Clara. She wore a gown of midnight blue that matched the winter sky, but it was the circlet of silver leaves in her hair, the crown of the consort, that caught the light. She looked radiant, the hollows of her cheeks filled out and the constant flicker of bird-like fear in her eyes replaced by a calm, steady strength. They don't just belong here, Clara, Dominic said, reaching out to pull her into the warmth of his side. They're here. This city used to be a fortress built on secrets. Now it's a home built on the truth. I used to wake up every morning in that cabin and count the minutes until someone found us, Clara whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. I forgot what it felt like to just breathe. You'll never have to count those minutes again, Dominic promised, his voice a low, resonant vow. The southern houses have signed a new treaty, one based on trade, not blood sacrifices. And the council? Well, Elrond is learning that the Blackridge dungeons are much colder than the Star Chamber. He turned her in his arms, his expression becoming intensely tender. I spent 7 years as a king without a heart, Clara. I thought power was the only thing that could keep my people safe. But watching you protect those children in that cave, seeing the way you never gave up on them or on the memory of us, that was the real power. We both had to learn, she replied, reaching up to trace the scar on his jaw, the one he'd received protecting Milo. I thought love was a weakness that would get us killed. I didn't realize it was the only thing that could keep us alive. The moment was interrupted by a thundering of small boots. Milo and Alara burst onto the balcony, their faces flushed from the cold. Papa, Mama, look. Alara shouted, pointing toward the great oak in the center of the gardens. The tree, which had been dormant for decades, was beginning to bloom in the middle of winter. Tiny, white flowers with golden centers were unfurling from every branch, reacting to the residual celestial energy Alara had brought to the city. It was a sign of a new beginning, a literal spring in the heart of winter. Dominic scooped both children into his massive arms, settling one on each hip as Clara wrapped her arms around all of them. They stood there, a family once broken by lies and separated by mountains, now united under the silver glow of the moon. There were no more hunters, no more moonbane, and no more hiding in the shadows. The Lycan King had chosen his mate, and though she had vanished to protect their legacy, she had returned to claim a future that belonged to all of them. As the sun began to set, casting long golden fingers across the snowy peaks, the people of Ethelgard heard a sound they hadn't heard in a generation. The king laughing with his children, his voice carrying the promise of a long, peaceful reign. The story of the maid who stole the king's heart and the twins who saved his soul would be told for 1,000 years, not as a tragedy of the past, but as a lullaby for the future. And that, my dear friends, is the end of our journey. My heart is so full right now. Seeing Clara and Dominic finally get the peace they deserved makes every tear worth it. I truly believe that love and truth are the most powerful forces in any world, supernatural or not. What did you think of the ending? Did the blooming of the great oak make you smile as much as it did me? Please, leave a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from the entire story. I love hearing your thoughts. If you enjoyed this 40-minute emotional roller coaster, please make sure you've hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories of magic, romance, and triumph waiting for you. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. I couldn't do this without you. Until next time, stay magical.